Hello everybody and welcome back to day 2 of the Fair Festival 2021. My name is Emily Johnston and I'm so excited to be here as your moderator for our wonderful 3-day festival, which is a gathering of the Go Fair community from across the globe. We have researchers, scientists, data experts, infrastructure developers, science policymakers, and many more joining us from across the globe to join us in making the fair shift visible. Now, I don't know what the weather's like for you right now, wherever you're calling in from, but right here, I'm in Bonn, Germany, and it's actually quite cloudy outside, and that's very fitting because currently there are 3 big cloud projects which influence the atmosphere. We have EOSC, we have the Gaia-X, and we have NFDI. And this is the topic of our first panel session for today. The session is titled Cloud Cosmos, Synergies Between the NFDI, EOSC, and Gaia-X. And we have a wonderful array of speakers here to discuss this topic with you today. So we have Isabel Campos, Coordinator of EOSC Synergy, Bob Jones, Director of the EOSC Association, Christoph Lange, Founding Member of the Gaia-X Association, Silvana Mosella, Coordinator of the EOSC Gaia-X Workshop, and Jörg Sureveta, Director of the National Research Data Infrastructure, also known as NFDI, Germany. And of course, I have with me today Klaus Tochtermann from Go Fair, who will be moderating the panel discussion. So Klaus, feel free to join me on the stage, and I would love to hear, how are you? How's the weather where you are today? Is it also cloudy?
Hi, Emily. Hi, everybody. Yesterday, we just had one big cloud. It was raining only once from the morning to the evening. And if I look out today, it's cloudy. It's more than 3 clouds, but not as bad as yesterday. So it's a nice sunny day here in northern Germany.
Lovely. And how are you feeling going into day 2 of the festival? What stayed with you from yesterday?
The panel yesterday was so relaxed. People even left for their lunch, came back, continued the discussion. So it's really a very agile process. So also to the other speakers, if you have further needs to do, we have plenty of time, just come back for the discussion. This also applies to all the attendees. I hope you stay here, you follow our discussions. I'm very confident and happy that we will go through the different clouds today, the NFDI, Gaia-X, and the EOSC.
Perfect. And I think that really captures the festival spirit, which is what this is all about, right? This is really a celebration of all the hard work that's been done. And of course, looking at the next steps to come in this movement. Could you share a few words about the intention of the upcoming session with us, Klaus?
Yes, I can. So in the EOSC Symposium, which took place last week, we also discussed what is needed to get more researchers, to get the research community involved into the EOSC developments. In yesterday's opening panel of the Fair Festival, we also discussed what is needed to increase engagement and increase the participation of the community. And it was mentioned with the top 3 priorities were information, communication, and collaboration. And I think this panel here is also a contribution to increase the information resulting to a higher degree of participation in the development of the 3 clouds, Gaia-X, NFDI, and EOSC. We are well aware that not everybody really knows what the differences are, how they relate to each other, and I think this is the objective of the upcoming panel, to provide more insights into each of these clouds and how they are connected to one another.
Perfect. Thanks so much. So lots of enlightening to happen. So maybe the clouds are going to part and the light will shine through by the end of the panel. Let's see. But first, before we get started, I just want to run through a couple of housekeeping things, and mostly to let our wonderful audience know how you can participate, because again, this is all about us connecting as a community. So throughout the discussion, we have a few ways you can participate. The first is there's the Q&A, which you find on the right side of your screen, where you can add questions. And later on in the discussion, we'll have time for your questions to be answered as much as possible. If you see a question that you really like, you can also vote it up. There's also on the right side of your screen, you'll see the chat function, so you can talk directly to your peers who are also in the room. And we will also record this session, and it will be available after the festival. So we want to invite you to stay fair, stay present, and tweet #FairFestival2021. What we also have throughout the panel discussion is a Mentimeter survey where we've prepared some questions that you can answer as we go through. And some of the questions are also the ones we'll be asking our panelists, so we can hear from some different perspectives from them, but also hear from you what your insights and experiences are with some of those questions too. The link will be in the chat for you, and we really invite you to share your thoughts there, and we'll present the results later on in the panel. Okay, so without further ado, over to you, Klaus, and welcome to all of our speakers. Have fun.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Okay, welcome everybody also from my side, and very glad that you accepted our offer to participate in this panel, because you can bring in different perspectives on the three clouds we will be talking about based on your experience, whether you have been chairing the high-level expert group for the EOSC like Silvana, whether you are a member of the EOSC board of directors like Bob, if you manage the big Fair Data Space project, which is the integration of NFDI in Germany and Gaia-X, like Christoph. Jörg, you have a tremendous amount of work with setting up the NFDI association in Germany. And Isabel, you are the one who is connected to the national initiatives, and who with the EOSC Synergy project is the one who will bring in the perspective how to connect the national initiatives with the EOSC. So all this experience we brought together here is super important for the for this panel now, and I hope that we can achieve good increase the knowledge, shed more light into what EOSC, Gaia-X and NFDI are. And to kick off, I would like to ask Jörg for the EOSC, for the NFDI, Bob for the EOSC, and Christoph for Gaia-X, to briefly explain the objectives of the three different clouds. What are their goals? What do we want to achieve with these goals? And maybe we start with the national research data infrastructure here in Germany. So Jörg, it's your turn.
Thank you, Klaus. I thought you are mixing it up now to make it more fun for us to answer. But of course, I'm well prepared, especially to give you a pitch on NFDI. I brought my flip-flops, so I'm hopefully on the right place now. It is a bit cloudy here too, but to be honest, after having very hot and very humid days, we are kind of grateful for these clouds. It is interesting to call NFDI a cloud, because maybe we are cloudy, but basically we are a network of people. Of course, we will rely more and more on cloud infrastructures, but the key aim and the key goal of NFDI really is to shape the digital shift in the different science disciplines. And that means it's a number of disciplines. Actually, we want to address it for all disciplines, whatever all is. But we want to have a certain approach that spans over nature sciences, digital humanities, culture sciences, engineering, math. All of these sciences are welcome to get on board. And as you know, the current evaluation is ongoing, and we are still looking forward for getting the results of the so-called second round of consortia, but it already looks quite interesting. And then there will be the third round of consortia next year, so we will have up to 30 disciplines, which are quite closely related sometimes, but which span across the landscape of science. And the key aim there is to take each community from the status where they are right now with the digitization of their processes and take the next big step forwards. And sometimes these steps are similar, and they are related to clouds and usage of clouds and technology, of course. But sometimes it is even more important to clarify legal aspects to be able to work with digital artifacts. Sometimes it's necessary to ask legal questions and to clarify them to be able to work with digital objects. And sometimes it's the aspect of bringing data literacy and the knowledge about data science into the communities themselves so that they are capable of doing the next steps. And that, I think, characterizes very, very nicely NFDI.
Jörg, could you share with us some figures about the financials of the NFDI? Because I guess that not all the attendees are aware about the funding which goes into the NFDI, because it's quite a bit.
Yes, Klaus, thanks for the question. Actually, the number which usually is given is that the NFDI is funded by up to 900 million euros over a time span of up to 10 years. And this is quite a significant amount of money which is being spent here. Of course, I can still sleep very well because I'm not personally liable for this amount of money. But as a directorate, we have a very small portion of the budget to coordinate the activities within this network. So that also shows where the big money actually goes. The huge portion of money goes into the science areas in combination with the infrastructure institutes. And that is one of the things which is really nice. It's researchers along with infrastructure personnel, which is receiving this money for the purpose of jointly collaborating.
Thank you, Jörg. And this is indeed a difference to the EOSC and how the EOSC association is set up, because Bob, we don't receive money from the commission to set up the association. Maybe you want to report a little bit about the objectives of the EOSC and how it relates to the EOSC association.
Yeah, thanks very much, Klaus. And hi to everyone from Geneva here. Also, quite cloudy. We've had a lot of rain, so I don't have flip-flops today, but more Wellingtons, I'm afraid. We had a lot of big downpour last night. So yeah, EOSC, so the European Open Science Cloud, to give it its official title. It's really the idea is along the lines that's just been described by Jörg, is really to sort of enable a trusted virtual federated environment across Europe that really promotes the sharing and reuse of digital output from research across different disciplines and so on. And this output includes not only data, of course, which is what everybody thinks of, but also publications, the metadata describing all these things and making it accessible, and software that goes with that as well. So the goal really is to put in place this sort of web of fair data and services. Just as Jörg described, it's not just about having the data. We also need the services that can act on that data as well and extract the knowledge from it and the insights. So trying to put this in place across Europe, so it'll basically give European researchers, the digital resources they need to practice open science as a daily activity, and also enable the sort of the interdisciplinary research to address many of the sort of societal challenges that not only Europe, but the world in general is facing.
Okay, thank you very much, Bob. And now we have the third cloud, Gaia-X, which also joined the race about managing data in federated infrastructures. And Christoph, maybe you want to explain our attendees what's the objective of Gaia-X and how it is set up as a structure.
So indeed, Gaia-X is not, maybe it would be a bit too simple to call it a cloud. It's also cloudy here, by the way. I'm almost next door from Emily in close to Bonn. But it is, well, Gaia-X is now officially titled as a federated secure data infrastructure. So in that sense, cloud is a means to an end. There is a lot of cloud technology being used, but what Gaia-X is aiming at putting things together, also multiple existing infrastructures, integrating existing clouds in a way that is decentral and that ensures sovereignty in various ways. So there is, for example, data sovereignty in that when one business owns valuable data, or let's say when researchers own or their research subjects own sensitive data, that this data can be shared, but still it is not messed with. So that certain rules and policies apply to the data, to how you use services, and that those who consume data and services stick to it. That's a major aspect in Gaia-X. It's also security and privacy by design. For example, thinking of the EU GDPR, which is kind of hard-coded into how Gaia-X shall work. Well, and then the other words are data infrastructure. And those who have known Gaia-X a while ago might recall that back then it was called an infrastructure for Europe. Now this term has somehow dropped, but the reasoning behind this is that it is not a closed shop that is only intended to work for the, let's say, for EU members. It is open to participants from all over the world. For example, the big hyperscalers from the US, also Chinese companies, but the common ground of policies and rules is clear. Everybody who supports European values of data sovereignty is invited to contribute, and all this can now be seen on the recent homepage of the Gaia-X European Association for Data and Cloud. You can find this at gaia-x.eu, and it is still quite dynamic. Gaia-X is young. The organization now has, I think, almost 300 members, still growing, and so there is a lot in progress also on this website.
Okay, thank you, Christoph. Just to summarize the first results or insights, we used the term cloud, and we have learned that neither of the three clouds is a cloud. You rather prefer the term federated data infrastructure. I think that's a very important message because also when we worked in the high-level expert group on the European Open Science Cloud, we were always unhappy with the term cloud because it implies a specific technical environment and solution, which, as we have heard now, is not the case in the EOSC, not the case in the NFDI, and not the case in Gaia-X. Still, to further shed light on how these three federated infrastructures will be related to one another, we will go through the further questions for this panel. Before I look into the details of the relations between two different infrastructures, I want Isabel and Silvana to answer my question. Imagine now, I mean, the three guys have promised that they provide the best like research data infrastructure, including a network of people to manage your data. What do you think? When will you get out most of your data from one of the three clouds or infrastructures, EOSC, NFDI, or Gaia-X? So what do you expect? By when will we be able to really get out the data which we are invited to put into these infrastructures? Maybe Silvana, you want to start first, and then Isabel?
Thank you very much, Klaus, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity for having me on this panel. It's actually cloudy with a chance of meatballs here. I'm in Pisa, in Italy, so that's the situation here. So before answering that, I wanted to just go back maybe just a second around the concept of cloud. And I think a hot area today is that we know that everything is not going to end up in one cloud, and applications are distributed, they're scaled, and they're very complex. So I think what we certainly see is, and people in general are building things and building applications, and some bits go in one cloud, some bits go somewhere else. And what is key, I think, is the distribution of this. So the distributed analytics we have today, we have distributed databases, distributed machine learning, and also the key area around federation and federated service mesh is where the key area is. So it's the people who are scaling and running and operating these scaled options, and that we know there is never one winner, which is also a good thing considering the table we're sitting in. In terms of date, if I think of, when we're going to get the most out of something, I wouldn't like to say, 2, 3, 5 years. I think what's encouraging that we've seen so far in 2021 is already initial discussions that are taking place that you mentioned before, Klaus, on the EOSC and Gaia-X workshop. A preliminary discussion happened back in March. There's another one at the end of June that fine-tunes some main priorities for the communities. And this is certainly the area around federation, creating incentives for industry to share their data with research is already on the cards. So I don't think, I wouldn't like to say, well, in 2 years' time this will happen. But already, if we're saying 2021, the stakeholders are sitting at a table to discuss mutual use cases and good practices, that's already a very encouraging sign. So I'm confident that already if a dialogue has begun, that this can only get better going forward.
Okay, thank you, Silvana. And Isabel, what's your take on this?
So good morning from Santander in the north coast of Spain. And it rains cats and dogs, so I don't know where is the sun today. It's not around. Yeah. Anyway, I think it's, to me the key word is interoperability of these services. You say as we move away somehow from the days in which the kings were the hardware providers, I think now integration of services, harmonization of best practices, etc., will be the major topic now, because during the past year, unfortunately, it became clear that there is room for improvement, regarding public data management, transparency, the quality of the data that has been made available regarding this pandemic situation has been in general very low, and that is something that needs to be addressed, and I think we are very well positioned to put in place interoperability guidelines, help putting in place more efficient tools, ensure transparency, etc., so that we are able to use the data not as a predictive tool, and not as a reactive one, as it is being used now, right? In general, I think scientific communities are, especially the advanced ones, they know how to handle data and how to share it. Yeah? But this has not finished permeating to the whole scientific landscape. This is impressive. And the awareness of all this is relatively low. Also, I made a little poll in my physics collaboration. And I will not tell you the results, or it will be depressed. Everybody knows what fair data is. So there is a significant effort still to be made in terms of education, etc.
Perfect. That's a perfect opener to the next questions I have prepared. They bring into context EOSC and Gaia and NFDI. And the first question is also one which the attendees can answer in the Mentimeter. We want to build up a tech cloud. And the question is as follows. FAIR is one of the principles to foster open science. We all know that. And here in Germany, we often say science is pop and open science is punk, meaning that open science is still very revolutionary, is not the new normal yet. And the question in this context is, to what extent, Bob, York, and Isabel, do you think is fair research data management still considered as punk in the scientific world? Is it still so revolutionary, or is it already a new normal in the scientific world? And maybe, Bob, you want to start, and then I continue with Jörg and Isabel.
So it's a very good way of framing the question, I think, because it puts it on a cultural level. Is it pop or punk? And I think it is a cultural change that we're talking about. The standard today is still not yet open science practices. And that needs to be a cultural change. It's not a technical change that's required. The technology can support any of these policies in reality. And what we need is a cultural change to get the researchers to actually adopt the open science principles and methods of working. You mentioned punk, and there's going to have to be a lot of training. So if we go back, you think about Sid Vicious. He couldn't play his bass guitar when he started with the Sex Pistols, right? He needed training to know how to play his bass guitar. And it's the same with our researchers. They also need some training and education to understand why open science is important for them, for their careers, and for the global challenges that we're trying to face. So yes, there is still work to be done, and implementing this cultural change is one of the key objectives of the European Open Science Cloud.
Okay, here it's cultural change, which is still ahead of us, which we need to manage in the future. Jörg, what is your take on this?
Yeah, first, of course, my take on punk. If you happen to have a chance to be in Reykjavik, I can recommend to visit the maybe only punk museum which is existing. It's a fun visit, but don't expect too much on the other hand. So this is my little take here. It's a very good question, very nicely framed. I think we have science disciplines where parts of the fair culture are already in place, and sometimes even for long years. And the social sciences are one of these examples where a large fraction of the community agreed upon what kind of large-scale studies to conduct, and then how to make the data available. And usually it's really according to the FAIR principles how these data sets are being made available, for example, via the GESIS data archive. They have a nice system which allows for persistent identifiers. They have metadata attached to all the data sets, and so on and so forth. Maybe the bit that is still missing is to really use the PIDs and to reference and to cite the data sets in the paper. So in this community, this is the next big step that still has to take place. But of course, we have other research disciplines that are quite far away from this status, where even the mere collection of data and the provision and the access to the data is not yet organized in a structured way. So there you need to know the person, and then you can send an email to the person asking, can I get your data? And then in many cases, the person will say, yes, you can have my data and work with it. But to find out what kind of data is available, there is really a problem. I have become quite optimistic for the chain so I'm optimistic about an increased speed in the near future. Why am I optimistic? When I revisited what happened during the pandemic actions last year, the amount of papers that have been published as open access, along with data sets, increased significantly within a very short amount of time. So to me, this was kind of a proof of concept that this is feasible, not just technically, but also from the mindset of people. Of course, we needed a big disaster to make this happen, but maybe we learned from that time, and maybe also other disciplines agree now more on the fact that sharing data, providing access to data is a very useful thing to speed up research in general. So in a nutshell, part of the community is already successfully established, the large parts of the FAIR principles, but other parts are still far away. NFDI is one of the places where we make the exchange of experiences happen between these communities. So this is one of our key contributions in the future, so that all the communities can get up to speed.
Okay, thank you. Isabel, this was the perspective of one national research data infrastructure, the NFDI. You are involved in the EOSC Synergy project, which kind of links up national infrastructures to the EOSC, and it's very much related also to capacity building, where we have a strong need to establish the cultural change, as Bob mentioned. So what's your take on this also in relation to the EOSC Synergy project?
Yeah, the situation is very mixed, I would say. No, whether punk is, like they say, punk because of radical. For some, it's not radical. No, there are communities. I mean, the archive is there since 1991. Yeah, anyway, but my impression is that a proper research data management needs to be sold to scientists in a way as that this is a sort of guarantee of quality of the research you are doing. No, otherwise there is no proof somehow. I mean, take the software development, that we haven't touched here. Usually, closed software is closed for a reason, and very often it's not related to high quality. That reason. So actually, these stacks tend to have more security vulnerabilities. Therefore, open source has been such an explosion on innovation, etc. No? Because it allows people to cooperate in fixing the code, in finding bugs, and that in my view is a very good example how openness helps innovation in general with the software. With the data, it's a bit more difficult because you need to be much more specialized to understand or to work with generic data. I don't know, from take the LHC experiments. No? Who can handle those data are open, but who can handle them if they wouldn't be properly documented, or you wouldn't have been involved in the generation of those data? Like this. In our view, it's important that researchers understand that having the data properly taken care of is a guarantee of quality, and that, as we always say in the high-level expert group, they will be rewarded for that. And at the moment, there is a lot of speaking about those rewarding mechanisms, but we are far from crystallization. Yeah, this is we are in times. Yeah.
Okay, and Jörg, we now discussed about in the first part about the different approaches. Everybody mentioned a federated research data infrastructure. We now discussed the maturity level of fair data. And the overall intention of the panel is to shed light onto the connections between the different infrastructures we have represented here. And one very important question is how does a national research data infrastructure like the NFDI can be connected to the EOSC? What's the contribution of an NFDI to the EOSC? And maybe you can explain that to our about 130 attendees we have currently listening to this panel.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing the figure. Yeah, I think we can contribute a lot and we can benefit a lot. And it's this exchange where I see the large step forward. So it's information, it's communication as you introduced, but also it's kind of technical contributions. And maybe I will focus a bit on this last part. So one of the very early papers, I realized that put some technical light on, let's say, topics that are on the European level that are also important on a national level, were papers about PIDs and PID system, and the paper also about authentication and authorization infrastructure. And let me take these two examples. If we want to achieve a European strategy on using PIDs, on the one hand, to assign persistent identifiers to data sets in a structured way so that more and more data is findable and accessible just by having the chance to identify them with PIDs, then of course this has to be reflected on a national level. And I don't think that this is a one-way road. So of course the EOSC needs to set goals, and NFDI tries to follow these goals. But on the other hand, we can also push back developments that we achieved on the national level and link this to the European level to get this thing up and running. Because this is like a little bit maybe in the Elixir environment, you know, where there's this one infrastructure for the life sciences, where we had let's say a European strategy, and we had national nodes contributing to the strategy. Of course, the funding setting there is a bit different, as we all know, but the metaphor, I think, works very nicely. So we have an idea where we want to stay in 5 or 10 years from now, having PID infrastructure out there, having an AI infrastructure out there, and having the people from Europe being able to sign in a data service, which is provided maybe by a national partner through NFDI, but which is available to all European researchers via EOSC, which is identifiable by a PID, which in a consistent manner is put to a data set and then can be reused for many different purposes. So this was kind of the vision, which seems to be very generic, but to really make this happen, we need the national alignment, because they're the organizations, the people who can really do the work and provide a service. They align, form strategies, and form a way how to do these technical infrastructure, how to bring these technical infrastructures alive for a country. And then ideally, this is 100% mapped to what is ongoing in Europe. And by that, we have a full picture.
Oh, Isabel, this is again one perspective from one of the EU member states. And had we like 10 different member states here, we would probably get 10 different suggestions for what is needed for the EOSC. And again, the question to you, how does the EOSC, in your view, integrate the variety of developments? We have just listened to one on PIDs, and how can EOSC benefit from the high number of different implementations from the different communities, but also from the different nations, from the different member states?
Yeah, I think that the trick that we are applying, at least at our project level, is finding the common denominators of all those scientific communities. So the common general services that could be used in EOSC. And these are access, computing and storage, resources, etc., that can be identified. So to say the common layer of services. This is, from what we see, very similar for all the scientific communities. Then there are, of course, specific services for scientific communities, which, if they became already pan-European, we know more or less how to apply interoperability guidelines to make possible the sharing of information and data. In a way, my impression is that one needs to provide tools that give more flexibility to the researchers to work. Yeah? Because if you are in a very large collaboration and you have a huge team behind, they would take care of the deployment of data repositories, etc. But this is not the situation of 90% of the researchers in the continent. This is just a few cases, no? And so giving the tools to the small research groups of 10, 20 people maximum, because this is where research takes place, so that they can interact with these global services in EOSC by themselves without requiring a specialized support, that will help moving forward.
Yeah, this all looks like calling for more convergence. And this is also the main strategic position the Go Fair initiative has taken last year. We wanted to converge all the activities which were going on in the different implementations networks. We had in November last year a large conference together with CoData, and this was all about convergence. So, Bob, what's your take on convergence, maybe from the perspective of the EOSC? And then again, Isabel, to you the same question. So Bob first.
Yeah, so I think the work of Go Fair has been very useful in this domain. The activities of mapping onto the matrix the different aspects of FAIR and the different implementations. I think, as Isabel highlighted, is that we shouldn't be thinking in terms of a single implementation. We need to have interoperating implementations, right, according to agreed guidelines and standards. And when it comes to FAIR, I still see a problem for many of the communities is that turning it from the principles into actions and into the necessary steps and the checklists that have to go on. And that is, I see, one of the important areas where the work of GoFair has contributed in terms of going from principles to actions by looking at the best practices and the convergence on those things. So we have to get to the point where we understand what each of those sub-elements of the FAIR principles actually means, and how can we verify that it's actually being adhered to and implemented, so that the different communities know what they still have to do and know what they've already achieved. So I see that as an important contribution. But certainly the work's not finished. It has to go further on, and has already been highlighted in this discussion today. There's quite a lot of disparity between the different communities and different research structures as to how far down the road they are in converging on these best practices. And we have to be tolerant, we have to be inclusive, and understand that it is a journey and there is still more work to be done. Isabel mentioned the LHC. If one looks at something like the open data portal hosted here at CERN, which takes significant subsets of data and tries to make it fair and accessible to the wider community beyond the researchers who actually created that data and participated in the experiments. And for me, we must remember that when you're looking about the convergence on FAIR, it's not just for the internal use of those communities themselves, but it's really to help the reuse, to help it become have a more wider impact and be consumed in other domains than it was originally foreseen. And for that, I think GoFair is going in the right direction.
And Isabel?
Yeah, I agree with Bob. It's a huge effort to present data in a way that can be exploited beyond the purpose that it was in our project. What we are trying to do is to, let's say, have a positive approach to researchers and point out what they are doing positively already in that direction. Yeah. And you can point out what is missing, but let's say kind of rewarding approach. Look, this works, you did this very well, etc. Because in the end of the day, time is not infinite. Also for that. And we have cases of people that decided to dedicate a postdoc to data management, and after that postdoc, they had to look for another postdoc. Yeah. And this is the reality of every day, of researchers. So, as I said, I see a solution in very large organizations that are willing to invest in making these processes more streamlined, etc. In smaller research groups, we need to come up with smarter solutions that they can actually adopt without dying on the trial.
Okay, so that was the second block, and one result is so far we definitely need more cultural change. It's not only a technical change to bring EOS, Gaia-X, NFDI to life. Cultural change among the researchers is necessary, and convergence, as we just discussed, is an important issue because we have so many different solutions around, we have so many different cultures around, and somehow we need to integrate them in the future. Mm-hmm. This was the perspective on how EOSC and NFDI relate to one another. The next section of questions will deal with the question how NFDI and Gaia-X relate to one another. Gaia-X, as Christoph mentioned earlier, the secure research data infrastructure, which might imply that all the other infrastructures are not secure, Jörg. So what is your, why is it important from your perspective to connect NFDI and Gaia-X to also have like a secure environment for the NFDI data? So Jörg, please.
Yeah, thanks. So when we started discussions on how these two large-scale initiatives fit together, it became very clear that from the 10,000 feet height perspective, it's an easy match. And the match is as follows. Gaia-X provides data sovereignty and a technical infrastructure which guarantees that for all kinds of different data sets. And it is standing on the shoulders of industrial partners. So those two are key features of Gaia-X. On the other hand, NFDI is a network of researchers and research infrastructures working on standards to harmonize data within the research disciplines, coming up with technical steps, but also with legal solutions to bring forward the digital shift in the different sciences. And actually, in many cases, data sovereignty is what researchers want to have. They want to share their data, but they want to be in control with whom they are sharing it. So a first step maybe is to share it with my colleagues in my office and then write a paper on it. And then maybe after an embargo frist of, let's say, 6 or 3 months, the same kind of data is then being turned into open data by making it available via a standardized portal, for example. And we should free researchers from solving all the technical problems to make this process happen. They just need to make the decision, and by the click, they can decide with whom to share, and they need an infrastructure that provides safety and security, of course, so that this is happen in the way that the researchers is expecting this from the infrastructure. And so I was very much hoping that we can find use cases in areas where this data sovereignty is very important in research, and then bring our requirements into the Gaia-X community to make a match out of that and show like in a lighthouse setting that this can be working. And then we maybe find more and more of these use cases and can step by step, community by community, identify where Gaia-X technology and NFDI research infrastructure is matching together nicely.
And Christoph, what's your perspective on this? Where do you see the synergies between NFDI and Gaia-X? Jörg just mentioned he very much likes Gaia-X so that he can share his data for which he needs sovereignty with the Gaia-X community. Is there also another way around so that Gaia-X services data might be shared with NFDI infrastructures?
Well, probably yes, but maybe to clarify one thing, let me first say where there is not yet sufficient synergy, where we still need to get things done. That is because there is a cultural gap to cross. Gaia-X originates from industry, so it was put into force by the ministries of economic affairs in Germany and France, and then quickly lots of other European and international actors joined. And the industry and the research community, they partially speak different languages, or at least they employ different currencies. For example, when dealing with, well, you mentioned it, that scientists, researchers probably also want data sovereignty, but I'm sure they want to be paid in different ways. I mean, money also is important in research, but what the researchers want is probably citations. So if you use this data, you must cite it properly. That's a rule for sovereign data exchange that will probably show up in a research data ecosystem, whereas in industry-driven in industry-driven ecosystem, it's more about financial compensation. Just to give one example. Okay, now for the synergies. There are synergies on all levels of the infrastructure. at the bottom of the Gaia-X infrastructure, we build on existing network and service infrastructure. For example, Kubernetes for service orchestration. Not to say that Gaia-X is solely based on Kubernetes. There's one example that could be used, but in many Gaia-X implementations, it is being used, and it is also being used in many research data infrastructures. And on the level of data and knowledge and semantics, we also rely on common semantic web standards, like machine interpretable, intelligent metadata description schemas that allow for connecting data to knowledge. And these synergies exist, but it's more of a matter of making both sides aware that we already have a lot of things in common, and that there are mainly cultural gaps to be closed.
Okay, thank you very much. And well, you just mentioned we have cultural gaps to close. The ministries you have just mentioned provided recently like about 6 million euros to bridge the technical gaps between the two projects. That is the Fair Data Spaces projects, which is about to align NFDI and Gaia-X. And of course, there's also one important work package on community building, which probably relates to the cultural change, to bringing together the two different communities. Still, the question is, why is it so difficult to link up these two initiatives? Why do we need so much money for for linking the infrastructures with one another, and what is the benefit for the users in the end? Maybe that's a question to Jörg and Christoph, and maybe Jörg first and then Christoph.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So the expectations on NFDI are high in many areas. And of course, the alignment of up to 30 different research communities is a task in itself. But I very much agree on this point of view that we need to align with industry also from the very beginning. And this joint project is actually the starting point of doing so. And why is the funding needed? Well, because we have activities that require a substantial amount of resources to be put on. For example, this community building is one starting point to start talking the same language for different data spaces, for example. So we want to host meetings for each data space where researchers, research infrastructures, and industry people can come together and find their own roadmaps for the future. But we also want to address technical and legal and ethical questions that arise for data that is in this overlap of research coming from academia and research coming from industry. And those are questions that are not necessarily tackled neither in NFDI nor in Gaia-X, because it's this overlap where the two are actually working together. So if researchers want to work with data from industry, very often they are hindered to do so. They are not having access to any kind of industrial data, and we need to find ways of establishing this in the future to be able to cope with climate change and maybe other pandemic situations. So we just need this collaboration. And so we need people who are investing their main time in devoting the collaboration. Therefore, you need some money to do so.
So, and Christoph, you are one of those who are investing most of their time into the collaboration because you are the project manager of the Fair Data Space project. What's your take on this?
Well, yes, my take is that there is indeed a lot of work to be done on various levels, on the level of community building, on the level of setting common standards, like legal and ethical standards, and of course on the technical level. It would be okay, Klaus. Your question was what is difficult? If you had asked what is the single thing that is specifically difficult, then I would not have been able to answer it, because there is not. It is not because there is a single hard challenge in this project, but the challenge is getting it done all together and making progress. So regarding community building, the challenge is, well, to establish an ongoing series of events that actually puts these communities, research and industry, in touch with each other, so that they know whom they can talk to about what, and this aligns well and is supported by other Gaia-X activities. So, for example, the German Gaia-X Hub is about to establish research and education as another of its application domains. On the legal and ethical side, it's again, well, bridging gaps. For example, what does research data ethics, what does this mean in business? And on the technical side, it is, well, to some extent, just hard, dirty work that needs to get done to put different systems that were created in different projects to equip them with common interfaces. We basically know how to do it, but we need to get it done and to demonstrate it in a way that convinces other actors to get on board.
Thank you very much. So indeed, I think that is very important that we link up the two different communities. And here we are not talking about disciplinary communities in different scientific domains. We are talking about communities in industry, the private sector on the one side, and research on the other side. And this is why our German Ministry for Science and Education is currently financing the Gaia-X NFDI project. And as mentioned by Christoph, we have a work package in this project, which is about community building. It's not only about national community building, it's also about international community building. So bringing together the international communities or European communities from different industry sectors with the national research communities. Which brings me to the next level of our discussion, which is the connection between EOSC and Gaia-X. And this is particularly interesting because the SRIA of the EOSC foresees that as of the year 2023, also data from the private sector will be available by the EOSC. And therefore, the first question is to Bob and then also Christoph. And this is also a question which you will see in the Mentimeter. So all the participants can provide their tags to the following question. What are the challenges, be it legal, ethical, or technical, that need to be addressed to enable a sovereign exchange of data between the private sector and science? So what are the challenges? And the attendees can just enter their tags in Mentimeter, and we will compare it with the answer of Bob and then Christoph.
Yeah, okay, so that's a very good question. Let me say, first of all, thank you very much to the other members of the panel for dispelling a myth in this panel that security and controlled access are not important for the research community. It is, very much so, and various reasons have been given, right? And we have to make sure that that is taken into account in EOSC, and that's why it's one of the principal elements when we describe the overall vision of EOSC, that is a secure distributed environment or federated environment for making, sharing, and reusing data. So that is important. Now, we talk about the sort of the legal, ethical, technical barriers. We can go through them one on one, but let's take a step back. The real question is trust. And all of those three elements are there to see, have we established trust between the participants in this data sharing exercise? Okay. We can use legal frameworks, we can use legislation, copyright, licenses, and so on to establish that trust on a legal front. We can worry about access communities, embargo periods, and so on for the ethical and so on aspects. And then the technical challenges as well, because people say giving access. What does giving access to data really mean on a technical level? Does it mean you're actually going to copy the data somewhere else? What control do you have over that copy of the data once you've copied it somewhere else? Technically, is it possible to copy that data? I wish you good luck at trying to copy all of the LHC data across to somewhere else in a limited amount of time. So there are a number of different parameters which basically go to show there is not one size fits all approach to establishing this trust between the different partners, okay? But it is definitely necessary. Now, if we take the concept of data spaces, and I understand from what I've learned about Gaia-X that the general model, correct me if I'm wrong, the general model is that there will be data spaces for different business sectors, okay? And in some view, I understand that Gaia-X considers EOSC and research to be one data space. Now, that is not a model that the researchers themselves take on board. They see themselves quite diverse. And in the European Commission's view of this, they don't see EOSC as a single vertical data space for a particular sector, but they see it more as a cross-cutting or horizontal data space where different data from different research disciplines may be of interest to different business sectors. Okay, and that's one of the sort of differences where we have to align. This whole approach to data spaces is something which is ongoing work, and we have to admit that. We have to understand how will that actually happen. But I'm pleased to say there's a lot of goodwill in EOSC and in the Gaia-X activities. Klaus has highlighted that Silvana is organizing another workshop, bringing the two things together. And these are one of the key points that we want to touch on and understand how can we get to this common understanding of how the data spaces can be implemented.
Okay, Christoph, now from the other perspective of Gaia-X, what are the challenges?
The challenges it's Bob, let me maybe attach to one of your points to start with something concrete. So indeed, I think one challenge is that we should not consider research as one silo besides other silos, mobility, energy, whatever, but that a challenge in community building is that we understand that there are, as you pointed out, research aspects in all of the other domains of the European data strategy that also Gaia-X aims at addressing. So, for example, that mobility is not only like traffic operators and travelers generating and exchanging data, but that it also has a research perspective that with the collected data, researchers would like to do something in order to again improve mobility services. That's one thing, and another challenge is that. Another challenge in bringing these communities together, both in a social but also in a technical way, is to generate an even better common understanding for the common foundations. For example, we in the research domain, of which I'm also a member, we talk about fair data, and everybody knows what it is. In Gaia-X, this, I think, to large parts of the Gaia-X audience, the term deserves explanation. Of course, the research data management community has done a great job by coining it as like in an easy to communicate way. When I spell it out as findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, everybody in the industry communities of Gaia-X understands what is meant. But I think what should be done is to break it down into all these fair principles and to see how they could apply to Gaia-X and how they actually map to what has already been done in Gaia-X, such that everybody becomes aware of like what we have already achieved together.
That is interesting that you mentioned fair and the perception of the fair principles in the Gaia-X community. Could you tell us on a scale of 1 to 10 how fair Gaia-X will be in the future?
Well, I think it will. it will become fair to a degree of 10. Which does not mean not to be misunderstood.
Yeah. Where are we now at the moment? We're on a scale of 1 to 10.
Well, at the moment, it's not to say that we are intentionally unfair, but at the moment, Gaia-X is still being built. So maybe one thing to make the audience aware of is that so far, Gaia-X has mainly consisted of specifications. And only in the last few weeks, the first calls for implementing the so-called Gaia-X Federation services, that is the basic infrastructure of what makes a Gaia-X ecosystem a Gaia-X ecosystem that respects sovereign data exchange, certain way of decentral identity management, and so on. These specifications have been issued. A tender is now open. And in the second half of the year, the first version of the Federation services will be implemented. And then next year, a second, more comprehensive version will follow. So that's why fairness is already being taken into account. It is given different terms. For example, the term of self-description by using semantic metadata. This is key to Gaia-X, and it has a lot in common with the FAIR principles. But the implementation is still going on, and that's why the small demonstrators that you so far see in the Gaia-X community, they are not yet as fair as they could be. So let's maybe say 6 out of 10 or 5.
Okay. In yesterday's discussion, also the other panelists struggled when we asked them the question about rating fairness on a scale from 1 to 10. The audience, the participants rated for the EOSC, they rated 3.6. That was the degree of fairness in their opinion within the context of EOSC. I would like to come to the Q&A with the audience, but before I have a final question to Isabel and Silvana, which the participants can also contribute to in Mentimeter. And the question is, how can we further incentivize FAIR? And we talk very much about FAIR data, but also fair research software, fair repositories, fair workflows are to be considered in the future development of the EOS, the NFDI, and also Gaia-X. Mm-hmm. So how can we incentivize like the fairness in these federated research data infrastructures? Maybe Silvana first, and then Isabella.
Yeah, thank you, Klaus, and thank you to all for the interesting conversations. I'd like to perhaps pick on the word that you mentioned at the beginning, Klaus, for collaboration. And York's introduced a couple of items that NFDI is working on with some scientific research infrastructures already. And I certainly wasn't aware of this. So, and I think that already the connections with the scientific domains, with the research infrastructures, whilst addressing societal challenges is already taking place. And this is a fantastic enhancement. To incentivize, I go back to there's never one winner, and because of something so large as this and so expansive, there are small bits that everyone can actually do here, and I think we should underline that. And it's important that the inclusiveness is key, that everyone thinks, well, I can actually do something. I'm not a research infrastructure, I'm actually an SME. Perhaps I can do a bit of this work here. I probably underline the area, the incentivization around the FAIR workflows. I think there's an incredible amount of work being done in different scientific disciplines from the science clusters that we heard some weeks ago. And I believe that could be an area where collaboration can be key, but not just between EOSC and Gaia-X, but also with NFDI. Something also about multidisciplinary efforts in terms of different domains that Bob, you mentioned before. We know for a fact that the life sciences, earth sciences, and biodiversity are working together. The social science and humanities are collaborating with health and potentially the creative industries in the future. So the amount also of verticals that are in clearly Gaia-X and NFDI is the incentive to go forward and match these efforts with these different communities together.
Okay, and Isabel?
Yeah, I would say incentivize. Yeah, there are many opportunities to make life of people, of researchers easier. No, see, for example, Gaia-X is about business models and use cases. We could certainly help in efforts related to metadata standardization and FAIR in general, right? Because these are problems that the scientific sector has addressed to a large extent. But, for example, the adoption of compatible models for data ecosystems in business models as well, or federation concepts, service integration, etc. So all, let's say, pointing to hide as much as possible the complexity of the interoperation to the end users. No? For example, it will also help promoting fairness, aligning the definition of technical and operational frameworks, no? to make the data exchanges between EOSC and Gaia-X possible, yeah? and share experience of the currently existing solutions, etc. So it's the answer is foster a bit of cooperation and build on the experience that there is. I think there is a lot of room for, let's say, for cross-fertilization between domains in this respect.
Thank you very much. I now would like to include the participants, the attendees to our discussion. And at this moment in time, I would like to ask Emily to come back on the stage so we can look at the Mentimeter polls and share them with the participants. So Emily, we had 3 Mentimeter polls. What is the outcome, or what is? Could you share your screen with us? There it is. Oh, we cannot hear you.
Apologies. Do you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's go to the results, and you should see my screen now. I'll just make it full screen for us. So we had 4 questions. The first of them we also heard from our panelists, and that is the big question: how far are we on the scale between pop and punk? And our audience rated us as 6.8 on the scale of pop to punk. So not too high, but actually not too bad either. What are your thoughts about that, class?
So meaning that on a scale between 1 and 10,
yes.
Still 6 point, what is it, 9 or something?
6.8 we've got, yeah.
Is considered to be punk. So fair data is still in a punk phase. Okay. Yeah, I think, that is a continuous discussion we are having. We are still discussing in a bubble among the experts, and we still have to invest much more resources into communication, into participation, so that we can raise the awareness of the FAIR principles. We have heard from Christoph that in the Gaia-X community, there is only very relatively compared to EOSC, very little awareness of EOSC. So that is not too surprising to me. By the way, all the Mentimeter slides will be put on the webpage of the conference so that you can read it after this panel has closed. Okay, that is my first reaction on this figure. So still punk. Okay.
Still punk, that's good to know. Yeah, absolutely. So the next question was that we asked everybody to prioritize which of the 3 pillars need the most attention right now. And this is also picking up from some of the discussions from yesterday. And it's been quite interesting to see the results come in, because it's really been shifting with all 3, to be honest, quite equal. So in the end, we had Go Train slightly above Go Change and Go Build, but Go Build was actually leading for a while as well. So I think that shows that everybody finds each of these areas quite important and interlinked.
So which one is on rank first and second? Because I cannot read.
Go Train is on.
Go Train, yeah, that is. Yeah, that is the capacity building, the education of data stewards. This very well reflects also all the discussions we are having in different environments. For example, at the EOSC symposium last week, training of data stewards, building capacities like in EOSC Synergy, which is led by Isabel. That's an important issue. So this confirms our perception.
Fantastic.
Okay, and the last one.
So we have two more to go, actually. And so the next one is the challenges. So as you have just been discussing with the panelists, and just to pick up on a couple of themes that showed up across the answers. So definitely one that also came up a lot in the discussion was the cultural change as a challenge. We also had trust showed up various times, being inclusive to a broad spectrum of stakeholders, having real joint cross-border funding possibilities. Also, the issue of bureaucracy showed up, so the fear that researchers turn into administrators, and the issue of storage and security of data. So these were a few of the topics that showed up across various respondees.
Yeah, I mean, we discussed that also. It also very nicely reflects what our panelists contributed. Trust seems to be a very important issue, so that is the data or is the infrastructure where I put my data on trustworthy? Are those who are using my data trustworthy? That seems to be an important issue. Security also. I mean, I don't want to leak or get my data leaked if I put them in like a good repository. And bureaucracy. I mean, bureaucracy is certainly an issue or an incentive why we kicked off the GoFair initiative as an early Kickstarter of the EOSC, because we wanted to do that, we wanted to get things done without a high level of bureaucracy, and that I fully understand.
Thank you.
And next one.
And lastly, we also asked our audience their ideas around incentivizing. And here we also had quite a few different ideas. There was the topic of communication. We heard this a lot yesterday as well, that it's not only about data, but also about sharing best practices. So I guess more internal communication within the community, but then also making it more explicit for researchers what they really gain by being part of this. We also had the need to include all European Union countries and not a small group. We had improving the quality of digital infrastructure, and we had creating change in the research merit system to rewarding data stewards, and the issue of finding a good balance between seeing that across our federated research data infrastructures, they have their own things that make them unique. So finding a good balance between a common approach to implementing the FAIR principles and also still space for these unique characteristics.
Okay. In view of time, I would like to jump to the Q&A because we received already many questions.
Fantastic.
And I would like to ask the others to come back on the stage. And I have here on my second device the first questions. The first one relates to Gaia-X. How can the use of Gaia-X for sensitive data by researchers outside Europe work when the legal regimes for the countries where those researchers are based are so different? Complex question, complex to understand, and I think even more complex to answer. So, Christoph, I think it's on you to try at least to give an answer.
Right. Well, on the management level, I should say that this week we'll kick off the FAIR Data Spaces project, and I think we might just add this question to the agenda of our legal and ethics work package. But now trying to answer more seriously. Not to say that my other answer was not serious. Of course it was. But I think I think it will be a long way to achieving automated AI-based, fully machine executable compatibility across different national legislations. So we should think towards a first more pragmatic step, which relates to making data fair, also making the knowledge behind the data fair, using, as Gaia-X would call it, using semantic self-descriptions. So when data is shared with other parties, then I think a minimum prerequisite is to annotate it in a descriptive and kind of self-explaining way with the little circumstances under which the data was created. For example, or one thing that is already common practice and that we know well is annotating data with UI that refers to its license. And similar things could be done for different laws, but then at some point it will not yet be fully automatable if implemented this year. But at some point there would be a reference to some article in some national law where some human interpretation would still be needed. But with today's technology, we can still facilitate this human interaction that is still needed.
Okay, Christoph, there are more questions to answer in the context of Gaia-X, and that seems to make the people, the attendees, curious. But the next one actually related to Gaia-X goes to York. At York, this is how the question starts. Do you imply that Gaia-X is mainly focusing on basic ICT infrastructure and generic infrastructure, while you would see EOSC and NFDI would be more focused on metadata or data implementation standards and content? So EOSC and NFDI more focus on the data implementation, Gaia-X more on the infrastructure implementation. That is a question you raised by your comments.
Thanks for the question, and thanks for bringing it to my attention. The answer is it depends. I think from a certain point of view, this can be a simplistic view on things. And from that point of view, I would even like to stress more the fact that NFDI is on the application layer. So it brings applications from various scientific domains to life, like electronic lab notebooks in the chemistry domain and other prototypes. However, from a different angle, this is maybe not necessarily fully true. And let me speak a little bit for Gaia-X, if I may say so, even though I'm not in an official role. So Christoph, please stop me if necessary by tackling me. Gaia-X has a number of data spaces that are community-based. And I would expect that those data spaces, like for energy, for mobility, for health, that you need to apply domain-specific adaptations to general technology. So I would not, actually as a technologist, I would not expect that this infrastructure can be completely general, but you need to have certain adaptations. And that is what I also hope for, because this is what we would like to bring in, the view from science to be able to customize such a generic technology to certain demands and requirements.
Okay, thank you very much, Jörg. The next one probably could go to Bob and Silvana. It relates Gaia-X and EOSC at a higher level. The question is, what can you learn from the EOSC experience and the current published documents for Gaia-X? And Silvana, you have been the chair of the last high-level expert group. You are involved, like Bob, in the Gaia-X EOSC workshops. What's your take on this? So what can we learn from EOSC for Gaia-X?
What can we learn from EOSC? So I think something that came out in the discussions between the two communities was the immense amount of documentation produced from the previous EOSC executive board on fair documentation and reports. And Gaia-X acknowledged this and said, well, rather than us reinventing the wheel, this is a message to you, obviously, Christoph, let's capitalize on what's already in the portfolio of EOSC from the fair perspective, and to try and bring that in to the Gaia-X community. So this is certainly one feature which was heavily underlined. Something, and maybe Bob wants to pick up on this after, that myself and Bob mentioned a few times in conversations, was the European data sets behind the sitting with the scientific communities, and how this can then become an incentive, if you like, for Gaia-X to see, Bobby also mentioned it before, what you can do with these European data sets within the Gaia-X context.
Yeah, certainly. I think the what we referred to before, sort of high-value data sets, those exist already. Many have been established through the different research communities, are made available today, and they can bring value into a number of the sectors for Gaia-X. What other things could Gaia-X learn from EOSC? Well, I was pleasantly surprised that in the end the architectures have a great deal in common. If you look at the architecture for EOSC, with the idea of a small set of core functions which enable the federation and sharing, and then above that, what we call the exchange, which is, if you want, some sort of marketplaces of services and data. That is very, very close as well to the model that's promoted within Gaia-X, with the idea of the federating services. And then if you go inside the federating services, it's almost a one-for-one match. So, you know, it's not just a matter of learning from one side to the other, but the fact that the two different initiatives arrived at the same conclusions gives me hope to think that we're on the right track.
Okay, thank you very much. And now a final question to the three infrastructures. So Bob for EOSC, Christoph for Gaia-X, and Jörg for NFDI. That is from a colleague who is also engaged in the Data Together initiative, Bonnie Carroll. All of the infrastructures we discussed recognize the need for openness and connectivity beyond Europe. And can each initiative briefly, maybe in 2 sentences, describe their strategy for connectivity beyond Europe? So how does EOSC, Gaia-X and NFDI connect beyond Europe? And then I would like to ask Emily to come back on stage to close the panel. So Bob first for EOSC.
Yeah, so, you know, science has no borders. There's absolutely no way the research communities would accept that we have a EOSC, which is only an island and did not interact with our colleagues around the world. So it's not just a nice thing, it's essential, okay? Now, of course, we're trying to do that through international bodies that exist, where these initiatives from around the globe come together, things like RDA, CODATA, and so on, where we can have joint agreements. There are some issues that have been raised already today about you know, what role will legislation, values such as European values and so on, play in this agreement when we go at a global level? There's also the question of reciprocity. That's to say that if Europe is being open and fair, it would also expect the other regions around the world to take a similar approach and also allow their research assets to be open and fair.
Thank you very much. And Christoph, Gaia-X, how does you connect beyond Europe?
All right. Well, the Gaia-X Association already has members beyond Europe, like big companies, but at the same time, also national hubs are being established to coordinate activities on a national level when in one state there is a lot of Gaia-X related activity. At the moment, there are almost 20 hubs. They are all, okay, to be honest, they are all in Europe so far. There is one hub in a non-EU member, which until quite recently was an EU member, that is in the UK, but that's already the first step. So going a bit out of EU legislation, and I'm sure that soon also hubs in non-EU and non-European countries will follow. So the invitation is open.
Okay, and then to close the panel, Jörg, you have the last word.
Thanks, what an honor in this great panel, by the way. So one of the strategies for internationalization beyond Europe is clearly the usage of standards who are being used on a global level. And those are web standards, for example, but also others. And I think a significant contribution which can be expected from NFDI is a harmonized and standardized set of metadata for various, if not all, research disciplines. And this really is the key to unlock the data. And if we then achieve that these harmonized metadata sets and ontologies are being translated into different languages, that will really open up the box for all countries in principle. And I'm optimistic because I've seen, as an example, Wikidata rising, and I'm still astonished how successful this human endeavor has been. And it's about sharing metadata, it's about harmonization of terms and aligning terms. Of course, science is a bit more tricky in many ways and more complex, but we can do the next step here.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to close the panel at this point in time. I would like to thank you all very, very much for your deep insights you provided to our attendees and participants. And I hope that we could shed some light on the connection of Gaia-X, NFDI, and the EOSC. Thank you very much that you spent the last 1.5 hours with us. And I would like to ask Emily to come back on stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Klaus, and thank you so much to all of our wonderful panelists for this, as you said, very insightful panel discussion, and also to our audience for contributing via the Mentimeter and Q&A. A couple of quick announcements. We have our next plenary, also our final plenary, tomorrow, same time, 12 p.m. Central European time. And the title of that plenary will be Global Open Fair Changes Happen. It will be a vivid session with contributions from all current and emerging officers to pave the way for future Go Fair community activities and to build on the achievements of the last 3 years. Next, in the afternoon, we will have a workshop again at 3:30 till 5 p.m. Central European time. And it's a collaborative workshop session on fair practices with the topics of sharing fair data stewardship, knowledge across borders, and fair for research software, machine learning models, and workflows. And very special and coming up right now is we actually also have a networking session. So of course, I'm sure there were many more questions out there than we had time to answer. And I'm sure you, our audience, are also keen to discuss some of the things you've heard yesterday and today. And this is your chance to do so. So of course, any festival needs a chance for you to actually connect with each other. And so we will share with you now a link to join us in our networking session. Grab yourself something to eat, to drink. It's a hop-on, hop-off lunch session. It'll just be half an hour, so quick, but a great chance to meet some speakers and other participants. So we'll share the link with you now, and I will jump over there, meet you there, and then explain to you how the platform works, and then it's all over to you to get networking. So see you in a couple of minutes, and thank you so much for being with us here this morning.